My name is Junior, and I just turned 32 last month. When my father passed away, he left me his entire construction empire. I never expected my mother to demand half of everything, especially since they divorced 15 years ago. When I refused, she invited me to what she called a family meeting to talk things through. I walked into that room expecting reconciliation, but found a team of lawyers instead. But that day, I had a surprise of my own waiting. Let me know where you are watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button while I tell you how money can turn even the closest family members into strangers. To understand how I ended up in that room full of lawyers, you need to know about my family. My father, Robert, built his construction company from nothing. He started as a carpenter, with just a pickup truck and a toolbox, working 16-hour days, 6 days a week. By the time I was born, he had a small crew and a decent reputation in our city. By the time I was 10, Hampton Construction employed over 50 people and had contracts for commercial buildings throughout the state. Dad worked constantly, but he always made time for me. Every Sunday was our day. Sometimes we would go fishing at Lake Mitchell. Other times we would work on old cars in the garage, or he would take me to job sites and teach me about the business. He was strict but fair, and I knew he loved me by how he invested his limited free time in teaching me everything he knew. My mother, Diana, was different. She came from a middle-class family, but had expensive tastes that grew with my father's success. She spent lavishly on clothes, jewelry, and frequent redecorating of our house. I remember constantly having workers in our home installing new flooring, repainting walls, or delivering new furniture. Dad rarely complained openly, but I caught glimpses of tension when the credit card bills arrived. Their fights were usually behind closed doors, but the atmosphere in the house would be thick with unspoken anger for days afterward. As a child, I learned to read the signs and make myself scarce when things got tense. The breaking point came when I was 16. I came home from school one day to find my mother entertaining a man I had never seen before. They were drinking wine in the living room, sitting unusually close on the sofa. When she saw me, she quickly introduced him as an old friend from college. Something about the way they jumped apart made me uncomfortable. I mentioned it casually to my dad that evening. His face darkened, but he just nodded and thanked me for telling him. 2 weeks later, after a thunderous argument that shook the whole house, my mother moved out. The divorce proceedings were ugly. What shocked everyone was that I chose to live with my dad. My mother had assumed custody would naturally go to her, but in court, I stated my preference clearly. The hurt and anger on her face that day burned into my memory. Dad and I moved into a smaller house closer to the company office, and for the next 2 years, I barely saw my mother except for obligatory holiday dinners that were always uncomfortable. After high school, I went to college for construction management and business. Dad paid for everything, telling me to focus on my education rather than working part-time jobs. Every break, I would come home and shadow him at the company, learning every aspect of the business from estimating to crew management to client relations. When I graduated, I took my place at Hampton Construction as a project manager. Dad made it clear that I would receive no special treatment as his son. I started at entry-level salary and worked my way up through actual accomplishments. The employees respected that, and over time, I earned their trust rather than having it handed to me through nepotism. By my late 20s, I was the de facto second in command. Dad and I had fallen into a comfortable partnership. He handled client acquisition and financial strategy, while I managed day-to-day operations and project execution. The company continued to grow, eventually expanding to 3 neighboring states with over 200 employees. During these years, my mother would occasionally resurface. Her appearances always followed a pattern. First, she would reach out with friendly messages, asking about my life and sharing news of her latest adventures. Then eventually, usually around the 3rd or 4th conversation, she would mention financial troubles. A bad investment, unexpected tax bills, or property repairs always seemed to create emergencies that only immediate cash could solve. At first, Dad would give her money to keep the peace, as he put it. But after the 3rd or 4th time, he stopped. Your mother needs to learn financial responsibility, he told me. Bailing her out only teaches her that bad decisions have no consequences. When I turned 30, Dad began experiencing health problems. It started with fatigue and shortness of breath that he attributed to age and stress. When he finally saw a doctor after months of my insistence, the diagnosis was devastating: stage 4, lung cancer, that had already spread to his lymph nodes. The next 18 months were a blur of treatments, hospital stays, and gradually watching my strong father wither away. I took over full operations of the company to give him space to focus on his health. During his final months, we had many long conversations about life, the company, and what mattered most. He updated his will and made his wishes crystal clear. "The company is your legacy now, son," he told me during one of his more lucid moments in the hospital. "Your mother will come asking for a piece of it. She always does. But remember that she chose her path long ago. You don't owe her a share of what we built together after she left." Dad passed peacefully in his sleep on a Tuesday morning in October. The funeral was well attended by employees, business associates, and community members whose lives he had touched. My mother came dressed in expensive black designer clothes with tasteful jewelry. She cried appropriately, accepted condolences graciously, and even stood by my side for part of the receiving line. The reading of the will took place the following week. As expected, Dad had left everything to me: the company, the house, his personal assets, and investment accounts, all transferred to my name. The only mention of my mother was a small bequest of $10,000 and a note that read, "Diana, I have provided for you fairly in our divorce settlement 20 years ago. This additional gift comes with my forgiveness and hopes that you find happiness." My mother maintained her composure in the lawyer's office, accepting the check without comment. She hugged me stiffly afterward and said she was proud of the man I had become. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days later, the phone calls began. The first call seemed innocent enough. Mom asked how I was holding up and mentioned she was having trouble with her condo association. "They're raising the monthly fees again, and with everything going on, I'm a little short this month. Could you help out, just until I get back on my feet emotionally?" I sent her $2,000, feeling it was the right thing to do. Dad had left me financially secure, and she was still my mother, regardless of our complicated history. A week later, she called again. This time, her car needed repairs. 2 weeks after that, it was property taxes she had forgotten to budget for. Each time, the amounts grew larger, and each time, I felt a creeping unease about the pattern forming. About a month after the funeral, Mom invited me to coffee to catch up. We met at an expensive cafe in her neighborhood. She arrived dressed in a new outfit with a designer handbag I recognized as costing several $1,000s. When I commented on it, she waved dismissively and said, "Just a little something to cheer myself up. Retail therapy, you know." After 20 minutes of superficial conversation, she reached across the table and took my hand. "Junior, we need to talk about your father's estate." I tensed immediately. "What about it?" "Well, I was thinking about it, and it doesn't seem fair that I received so little. After all, I was married to your father for 18 years. I supported him when the business was nothing. I raised you. Half of everything he built should rightfully be mine." I pulled my hand away. "Mom, you and Dad divorced 20 years ago. You received a settlement then." Her expression hardened slightly. "That was before the company expanded to other states. Before the Miller contract and the Westridge development. I deserve a portion of that growth too." "The growth happened after you left," I pointed out. "Dad made his wishes clear in the will." "Wills can be contested," she said, her voice taking on an edge I recognized from childhood arguments with my father. I was still his wife during the formative years of the company. Any court would recognize my contribution. "What contribution exactly?" I asked, feeling heat rise in my face. "Dad worked 18-hour days while you redecorated the house every 6 months." Her face flushed with anger. "How dare you? I sacrificed my career to raise you. I managed the household so your father could focus on business." I entertained clients and helped build the social connections that made the company successful. The conversation devolved from there. She alternated between guilt trips about being abandoned in her golden years and veiled threats about legal action. When I remained firm, she switched to tears, claiming she was struggling financially and that Robert would have wanted her taken care of. I left the cafe shaken. That evening, I called Thomas Whitfield, my father's longtime attorney, who had handled the will. "Your mother has no legal claim," Thomas assured me after I recounted the conversation. "The divorce settlement was generous and finalized decades ago. The will is solid. However," he added cautiously, "she could still cause problems by contesting it. Even without merit, such challenges can tie assets up in court for months or years." "What should I do?" I asked. "Document everything. Any conversations, requests for money, threats. If she continues to escalate, we'll need evidence of her behavior." The calls and texts increased over the next few weeks. I began recording phone conversations after checking that our state had one-party consent laws. Mom cycled through multiple strategies. Sometimes she was the loving mother, concerned about my workload running the company alone. Other times, she spoke about her contributions to the family business. Occasionally, she would mention her financial advisor who thought she had a strong legal case for claiming half the estate. My stress levels rose, affecting my sleep and my ability to focus at work. Hampton Construction needed strong leadership after my father's death, but I found myself distracted by this growing personal crisis. Several loyal employees who had known my father for decades noticed the change. Walter, our operations manager and my father's friend for 30 years, finally confronted me in my office. "Something's eating at you, Junior. Your father would want me to check in." I found myself confiding in him, explaining the situation with my mother. Walter's face darkened as I spoke. "Your mother always had expensive tastes," he said carefully. "I remember in the early days, your father taking extra jobs on weekends to keep up with the credit card bills. He worked himself to exhaustion, trying to meet her expectations. This was news to me." "He never complained," I said. Walter nodded. "That was Robert. He believed a man didn't burden others with his problems, but there were times he slept in his truck between jobs because he was too tired to drive home." This revelation added to my resolve. The next time my mother called, I was direct. "Mom, I'm not giving you half the company or the estate." Dad made his wishes clear. "Please stop asking." There was a long silence on the phone before her voice came back, colder than I had ever heard it. "You ungrateful child. After everything I sacrificed for this family, your father poisoned you against me, and now you're just like him. Selfish and cruel." "That's not fair," I started, but she cut me off. "I'll get what I deserve, Junior. One way or another. This isn't over." She hung up, and I sat staring at the phone, a chill running down my spine. That night, at nearly midnight, she called again. This time, her words were slurred, and I suspected she had been drinking. "You think you're so smart," she rambled. "You're precious daddy's boy. But I know people, important people, lawyers who owe me favors. You have no idea who you're dealing with." The call devolved into increasingly incoherent threats before she finally hung up. I blocked her number that night, needing space to think and sleep. The next day, I received a call from an unexpected source. My Uncle James, my father's younger brother who lived in Colorado. We weren't particularly close, as he visited only occasionally, but he had always been kind to me. "Junior, I heard from your mother last night," he began without preamble. "She called ranting about you cutting her out of her rightful inheritance. I wanted to check your side of the story." I explained the situation, and James sighed heavily. "I was afraid of this. Listen, there's something you should know. Your mother has a history with this kind of thing." According to James, my mother had attempted similar financial manipulation with her own parents years ago, before I was born. When her father died, she had tried to persuade her elderly mother to change the will in her favor, excluding her two siblings. It had caused a family rift that never fully healed. "Be careful, Junior," James warned. "Diana can be charming and persuasive, but she's only looking out for herself. She'll use every emotional tool in her arsenal to get what she wants." His warning proved prescient. A week after I blocked her number, I received a text from an unknown phone. "Junior? It's your mother. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and realize I approached this all wrong. I'd like to apologize in person. No talk of money or the will, I promise. Just family reconnecting. Can we try again?" Against my better judgment, I responded to my mother's text. Something in me still hoped for reconciliation, for a relationship that wasn't centered around money. We exchanged a few messages that seemed promising. She expressed regret for how our last conversation had ended and suggested we had both been emotional due to grief. "Your father would hate seeing us at odds," she wrote. "Whatever our differences, we're still family. Can we start fresh?" I consulted with Uncle James, who cautioned me to proceed carefully. "If you do meet her, make sure it's on neutral ground, a public place where she can't make a scene." Instead, Mom suggested a family dinner at her condo. "I'm inviting your cousin Rachel too," she added, referring to my father's niece who lived in the same city. "Just family, good food, and healing old wounds." The mention of Rachel made me feel more comfortable with the arrangement. Rachel and I had been close as children, though we drifted apart in adulthood. Her presence would provide a buffer and keep the conversation civil. Still, something made me uneasy. Before the dinner, I reviewed my father's will again and had a brief call with Thomas Whitfield. "Just stay calm and don't agree to anything," he advised. "You're under no obligation to discuss financial matters if you don't want to." I arrived at my mother's upscale condo building at the agreed time, 6:30 on a Thursday evening. As I pulled into the visitor parking, I noticed several expensive cars I didn't recognize. A black Mercedes, a Tesla, and a BMW were parked near the entrance. An uneasiness grew in my stomach. The doorman recognized me and let me up without calling. As I rode the elevator to the 12th floor, I rehearsed what I would say if Mom brought up the inheritance again. I would be firm, but kind. I would redirect the conversation to positive memories of Dad. I would suggest grief counseling for both of us. I knocked on the door of Unit 1203, and it swung open almost immediately. Mom stood there in an elegant black dress, pearl necklace gleaming at her throat. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Junior, right on time. Come in." I stepped into the foyer and heard voices coming from the living room. Multiple voices, none of which sounded like Rachel's. Keppel. Mom took my coat and gestured me forward. Everyone's waiting. I walked into the living room and froze. 5 people in business attire sat arranged around the space, folders and documents spread on the coffee table. No sign of Rachel. No sign of dinner preparations. "Junior," my mother said smoothly, coming to stand beside me. "I'd like you to meet my legal team. This is Marcus Aldridge, my primary attorney." A silver-haired man in an expensive suit stood and extended his hand. I didn't take it. "What is this?" I asked, looking directly at my mother. "This is us resolving our situation efficiently," she replied. "I thought rather than dragging things out with unpleasantness, we could come to an agreement tonight." Marcus Aldridge cleared his throat. "Mr. Hampton, your mother has retained our firm to help mediate a fair distribution of your father's estate. We've prepared some documents that would avoid a lengthy court battle and provide an equitable solution for all parties." A younger attorney, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper suit, slid some papers across the coffee table. "This agreement transfers 50% of Hampton Construction shares to your mother, along with half of your father's personal investment portfolio. In exchange, she waives any further claims against the estate." I felt ambushed and cornered. "Where's Rachel?" I managed to ask. My mother waved dismissively. "A small misunderstanding. She couldn't make it tonight." I strongly suspected Rachel had never been invited in the first place. Aldridge continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "Your mother has a strong case for contesting the will. She contributed significantly to the growth of the company during their marriage, and 18 years as the spouse of the founder entitles her to consideration that the current will does not reflect." "The divorce settlement covered all that," I said, finding my voice. "She has no claim." The sharp-eyed woman spoke again. Legally, that's debatable. We have documentation of your mother's contributions, testimony from former business associates about her role in client relationships, and evidence that your father may have hidden assets during the divorce proceedings to reduce the settlement. I knew the last claim was completely false. My father was many things, but dishonest was never one of them. Still, I felt increasingly outnumbered and unprepared. 5 attorneys versus me, all of them looking at me expectantly. If you sign tonight, Aldridge said, his tone softening to something almost fatherly, we can avoid depositions, discovery, and a public airing of family matters. The company can continue operations without the cloud of litigation. Everybody wins. My mother sat on the arm of a chair, watching me with that same, not quite smile. It's what your father would want, Junior. Peace in the family. That statement, so blatantly false, broke through my shock. Dad had explicitly warned me about exactly this scenario. I looked around the room, at the predatory expressions thinly veiled behind professional masks, and realized I needed to buy time. I need to use the restroom, I said, and I'd like a few minutes to review these documents. My mother's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded. Down the hall, second door on the left. Take your time. I picked up the stack of papers and headed in the direction she indicated. Once inside the bathroom, I locked the door and leaned against it, heart pounding. I skimmed the documents quickly. They were exactly what the attorneys had described. A complete capitulation to my mother's demands, dressed up in legal language as a mutual agreement to avoid litigation. I pulled out my phone and made a call. Thomas, it's Junior Hampton. I need your help right now. After explaining the situation to Thomas Whitfield, I followed his instructions precisely. First, I activated the recording app on my phone and placed it in my breast pocket. Then, I splashed water on my face, took several deep breaths, and returned to the living room with the documents in hand. The attorneys looked up expectantly as I entered. My mother had moved to sit in a high-backed chair that resembled a throne. Her expression was a mixture of anticipation and triumph that she wasn't bothering to hide anymore. Have you had a chance to review everything? Aldridge asked, gesturing to the papers in my hand. I nodded and sat down on the edge of the sofa. I have some questions first. Of course, the sharp-eyed woman said. Her name tag read Jessica Winters, Esquire. She leaned forward. That's why we're here. Let's start with the claim that my father hid assets during the divorce, I said, keeping my voice level. Do you have actual evidence of that? Jessica and Aldridge exchanged quick glances. We have preliminary findings that suggest irregularities, Aldridge said carefully. Bank transfers to accounts that weren't disclosed in the divorce filings. Those were business accounts, I said, all properly documented in the company records, which were part of the divorce proceedings. Well, we would need to verify that through discovery, Jessica countered. Unless we settle today. I turned to my mother. You know Dad wasn't dishonest. Why would you make these accusations? She shrugged elegantly. Business is business, Junior. Your father understood that. It's just negotiation. And what about the claim that you contributed significantly to the company growth? I asked. Dad built that business through 18-hour days and personal sacrifice. I was essential to client relationships, she insisted. I hosted dinners, attended functions, maintained our social standing, all crucial to business development. I nodded slowly, as if considering this. One more question. If I don't sign tonight, what happens next? Aldridge sat up straighter. We would file to contest the will immediately. The probate court would freeze all assets pending resolution. Hampton Construction would be unable to access capital or distribute profits. Operations would be severely impacted. The process could take years and cost a fortune in legal fees, added a balding attorney who hadn't spoken until now. I let silence hang in the room for a moment. Then, I reached for a pen on the coffee table. Where do I sign? My mother's face lit up with poorly concealed triumph. Aldridge quickly arranged the papers, pointing to signature lines marked with small flags. Initial here, here, and here. Full signature on the last page. I uncapped the pen and held it over the first page. Everyone leaned forward slightly, like predators sensing a kill. Then I looked up at the clock on the wall. Any minute now. Any minute for what? My mother asked, impatience edging into her voice. As if on cue, the doorbell rang. That would be them, I said, recapping the pen and standing up. Who? My mother demanded, rising from her chair. My legal team? I replied calmly. You didn't think I'd come to a family meeting without backup, did you? Before she could respond, I walked to the door and opened it. Thomas Whitfield stood there with 2 colleagues, all carrying briefcases. Behind them was a uniformed police officer. Right on time, I said, gesturing them in. The expressions on my mother's legal team ranged from confusion to alarm. Aldridge stood up immediately. What is the meaning of this? Thomas stepped forward. Marcus, interesting to see you here. I'm Thomas Whitfield, legal counsel for Junior Hampton and executor of Robert Hampton's estate. He nodded to his colleagues. This is Sarah Chen, our litigation specialist, and Michael Dawson, our forensic accountant. And the officer? Jessica Winters asked, eyeing the policeman warily. Officer Brooks is here to witness and document what appears to be an attempt at coercion and fraudulent transfer of assets, Thomas said calmly. We have reason to believe this meeting was arranged under false pretenses with intent to pressure my client into signing away his legal inheritance. My mother found her voice. This is absurd. This is a private family meeting. You're trespassing. I pulled my phone from my pocket and stopped the recording. A family meeting with 5 attorneys present, making false accusations about my father and threatening extended litigation if I don't sign away half of my inheritance. I turned to Officer Brooks. I've recorded the entire conversation since I returned from the bathroom. They explicitly threatened to freeze company assets and drag out legal proceedings unless I sign tonight. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. Aldridge's professional demeanor cracked slightly. Recording without consent is illegal in this state. Thomas smiled thinly. Actually, Marcus, you should review the law. In this jurisdiction, only one party needs to consent to recording if there's reasonable suspicion of fraudulent activity or coercion. Given the false pretenses of this meeting and the nature of the threats made, I believe the recording will be admissible. Jessica Winters began gathering papers quickly. This meeting is over. Mrs. Hampton, we should continue this discussion at our offices. Before you go, I said, pulling a folder from inside my jacket, you might want to review these documents. I handed copies to each attorney. These are bank records showing transfers from my mother to offshore accounts over the past 5 years, totaling over $2 million. Money she claimed not to have during recent conversations with me when asking for financial assistance. The attorneys looked at the documents, then at my mother, whose face had gone pale. There's also documentation of her pattern of financial manipulation, including sworn statements from her siblings regarding similar behavior with her parents' estate. And finally, there's a complete forensic accounting of my father's finances during and after the divorce, demonstrating full disclosure and compliance with all settlement terms. I looked directly at my mother. You said it yourself. Business is business. I just came better prepared. The balding attorney closed his folder and stood up. Mrs. Hampton, I believe our firm needs to reassess our representation in this matter. The claims you provided us appear to have serious factual discrepancies. One by one, the attorneys made similar statements and excused themselves. Thomas and his team took their places around the coffee table, creating a physical barrier between me and my mother. When only my mother and our respective legal teams remained, I finally said what I had come to say. Funny, I bought someone too. The difference is, mine are actually working for me, not setting me up for a fall. My mother's composure finally cracked. You ungrateful, sneaky little. You set me up. You recorded me privately. You invaded my financial records. No, Mom. You set me up. You invited me here under false pretenses. You tried to ambush me with lawyers and false claims. And those financial records? All obtained legally through standard discovery procedures after you threatened litigation. Thomas stepped in. "Mrs. Hampton, here are our terms. You will cease all attempts to contest Robert Hampton's will. You will sign a legally binding agreement, acknowledging the will's validity and waiving all future claims. In exchange, we will not pursue charges for attempted fraud, will not release the recording of tonight's meeting, and will not expose your financial misrepresentations to the broader family." "And if I refuse?" she asked, chin raised defiantly. Sarah Chen, Thomas's litigation specialist, spoke for the first time. "Then we counter-sue for harassment, fraud, slander against Robert Hampton's character, and emotional distress. We release the recordings to family members and business associates. We expose your financial situation, including the offshore accounts you've hidden from creditors, and we pursue maximum penalties under the law." My mother looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years, not as a source of money or an obstacle to her desires, but as the son of the man who had built something valuable through honest work. "You're just like him," she said finally. It wasn't entirely clear whether she meant it as an insult or a concession. "I'll take that as a compliment," I replied. "Now, let's finish this once and for all." The immediate aftermath of that confrontation was both simpler and more complex than I had anticipated. My mother signed Thomas's documents with minimal additional protest, legally renouncing any claim to my father's estate or Hampton Construction. The meeting ended with her attorneys withdrawing and my legal team escorting me out. I didn't look back as I left her condo. The emotional aftermath, however, was just beginning. For the first few days, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and loss. I had stood my ground and protected what my father had built, but I had also severed whatever tenuous connection remained with my only living parent. Despite her manipulations, that reality was difficult to process. Thomas advised me to maintain no contact for at least 30 days, allowing the legal agreements to settle and emotions to cool. During that time, Hampton Construction required my full attention anyway. Dad's passing had created uncertainty among some clients and employees, and I needed to establish myself as a capable leader who would maintain the company's reputation for quality and integrity. About 2 weeks after the confrontation, Walter came into my office with an unusual request. "Junior, there's something you should see," he said, placing a file folder on my desk. The accounting department flagged some irregularities going back a few years. "I think your mother may have been more involved in company finances than we realized." The folder contained documentation of several suspicious transactions during the last years of my parents' marriage. Small amounts had been regularly diverted from project budgets into accounts that didn't appear in the official company records. The individual transactions were too small to notice, but over time, they added up to nearly $300,000. "Your father discovered this after the divorce," Walter explained. "He chose not to pursue it legally to avoid scandal for the company and more trauma for you. He simply implemented better financial controls and wrote it off as a costly lesson." This revelation hit me hard. Not only had my mother attempted to take half the company now, but she had been skimming from it years before. The depth of her financial dishonesty was greater than I had imagined. I shared this information with Thomas, who incorporated it into our ongoing investigation of my mother's finances. What emerged was a troubling pattern spanning decades. My mother had systematically lived beyond her means, accumulating debt and then seeking bailouts from family members or diverting funds when possible. The divorce settlement, which I had always been told was generous, had been depleted within 5 years through luxury purchases and bad investments. The offshore accounts we had discovered were nearly empty as well, most of the money having been spent on maintaining appearances. Her expensive condo had 2 mortgages against it and was technically underwater. Her designer wardrobe and jewelry were mostly purchased on credit cards that were near their limits. "She's been running a personal Ponzi scheme," Thomas explained during a meeting in his office. "Using new credit to pay off old debts, constantly staying just ahead of complete financial collapse. Your inheritance would have been a windfall that reset the cycle, but it wouldn't have solved the underlying problem." This knowledge should have made me angry, but instead, I felt a profound sadness. What emptiness inside my mother drove this endless pursuit of material wealth and status? What had my father seen in her initially, And had she always been this way? I tried to focus on work, but found myself distracted by these questions. My sleep suffered, and employees noticed my short temper and lack of focus. Finally, I took Walter's advice and scheduled an appointment with Dr. Patricia Morrison, a therapist who specialized in family conflicts and grief. Your mother appears to display classic signs of narcissistic personality disorder with possible compulsive spending tendencies, Dr. Morrison suggested, after I described the situation. The constant need for admiration and status, lack of empathy, exploitation of others, and sense of entitlement all point in that direction. Can people like that change? I asked. Dr. Morrison's expression was compassionate but realistic. Significant change requires first acknowledging there's a problem, which is particularly difficult for individuals with narcissistic traits. Without professional intervention and genuine desire to change, the patterns typically continue. Our sessions help me process not only the recent conflict but years of childhood experiences that suddenly made more sense. The constant redecorating of our home, the lavish parties that put my father in debt, the emotional manipulation when she didn't get her way. These weren't just personality quirks but manifestations of deeper issues. Meanwhile, my mother wasn't accepting her defeat quietly. Through family connections, I learned she was telling a very different version of events. In her narrative, I had cruelly cut her off without support, ungratefully seizing control of a company she had helped build, and threatening her with legal action when she merely asked for fair treatment. Some distant relatives and former family friends believed her story and reached out to express their disappointment in my behavior. Each message stung, but I followed Thomas and Dr. Morrison's advice to not engage or defend myself. The truth will eventually become apparent through your actions and character, Dr. Morrison counseled. Trying to correct every false narrative only keeps you entangled in the drama. About 2 months after our confrontation, I encountered my mother unexpectedly at Giovanni's, an upscale restaurant downtown, where I was having dinner with a potential client. She was dining with a man I didn't recognize, dressed impeccably as always. Our eyes met across the room, and after a moment's hesitation, she excused herself from her companion and approached my table. "Junior," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "You're looking well." I introduced her politely to my client, maintaining professional courtesy. After an uncomfortable exchange of pleasantries, she leaned closer and said quietly, "I want you to know I've had to sell my jewelry collection and downsize my living arrangements because of your actions. I hope you're satisfied." Before I could respond, she returned to her table. The client, sensing tension, asked if everything was all right. "Family business," I explained with as much composure as I could muster. "Shall we get back to the proposal?" Later that night, I called Uncle James to debrief about the encounter. "Classic guilt trip," he said, after hearing my account. "Don't let it get to you. Your mother has always been the victim in her own story." Despite such incidents, I gradually found my footing both as company president and as a person independent from family drama. Hampton Construction secured several major new contracts. I implemented some innovations Dad had been considering before his illness, including a green building initiative that won us positive press and attracted environmentally conscious clients. Through it all, I continued therapy with Dr. Morrison, working through the complex grief of losing my father while simultaneously confronting the reality of who my mother truly was. "You're mourning two parents," she observed. "The father who died and the mother you needed but never truly had." 6 months after the confrontation, I received an unexpected email from my mother's sister, Aunt Linda, whom I hadn't seen in years. She asked to meet for coffee, and curiosity led me to accept. Linda was older than my mother, but dressed more modestly, and had a warmth to her that my mother had always lacked. After catching up briefly, she came to the point of our meeting. "Diana is in financial trouble again," she said, using my mother's first name. "Serious trouble this time. She's asked me for a loan that I simply can't provide." Before approaching other family members, I wanted to understand what happened between you two. Her version seems incomplete. I gave Linda a factual, unemotional account of recent events, including the ambush meeting and the subsequent discoveries about my mother's financial history. I showed her some of the documentation Thomas had compiled, being careful to present facts rather than judgments. Linda listened quietly, occasionally nodding, as if pieces of a puzzle were falling into place. When I finished, she sighed deeply. This pattern goes back to our childhood. Diana was always Father's favorite, always given special treatment. Nothing was ever enough. When she didn't get her way, there were tantrums, accusations, manipulations. She looked at me with compassion. I'm sorry you've had to deal with this alone. Our family has enabled her behavior for decades. This conversation with Linda provided unexpected validation and began a healing process I hadn't realized I needed. Over the coming weeks, other family members reached out, including cousins I had lost touch with, and even my mother's brother. A more accurate understanding of events spread through the family, and gradually, the cold shoulders and accusatory messages stopped. Meanwhile, Hampton Construction continued to thrive. I found myself drawing on my father's lessons more than ever, particularly his emphasis on integrity and fair dealing. Your reputation is built one client, one project at a time, he used to say, and it can be lost just as quickly if you prioritize profit over doing what's right. As the one-year anniversary of my father's death approached, I realized I had not only survived the crisis, but had grown through it. I was leading the company with confidence, had strengthened connections with honest family members, and was building a life that honored my father's legacy while being authentically my own. As 6 months became 9, and then a full year since my father's passing, Hampton Construction had not merely survived the transition but was actively growing. We'd expanded our commercial division into green building projects, something my father had been considering before his illness. The first such project, an energy-efficient office complex downtown, had just been completed on time and under budget, earning praise from city officials and environmental groups alike. During this time, I had no direct contact with my mother. Through family, I heard she had indeed downsized, selling her luxury condo and moving to a smaller apartment in a less prestigious neighborhood. Some relatives reported that she seemed humbled by the experience, while others insisted it was just another act designed to elicit sympathy and financial support. I focused instead on implementing my father's business vision while adding my own innovations. Hampton Construction established a scholarship fund for local students pursuing trades or construction management degrees. We created an apprenticeship program targeting underserved communities, and we launched a small foundation to support affordable housing initiatives throughout the state. Your father would be proud, Walter told me, after we announced the foundation at the company's annual meeting. Not just of the business success, but of how you're using it. Thomas Whitfield had become not just my attorney, but a valued advisor and friend. During one of our regular lunch meetings, he brought up something unexpected. I received a call from Marcus Aldridge yesterday, he said, referring to my mother's former attorney from the ambush meeting. He's no longer representing her, but he passed along a message. She wants to arrange a meeting with you. A real one this time, no lawyers. My immediate instinct was to refuse. The memory of that night in her condo was still raw, and Dr. Morrison had warned about getting pulled back into toxic relationship patterns. But something else my therapist had said came to mind as well. Healing sometimes requires closing loops, addressing unfinished business. What do you think? I asked Thomas. He considered carefully before answering. Legally, there's no reason for a meeting. The agreements are ironclad, and she has no leverage. Personally, that's a different question. What would give you the most peace going forward? I thought about it for several days before responding to the message through Thomas. I would meet with her, but only under specific conditions. In a public place, during daylight hours, with a clear time limit, and with Thomas aware of all details in advance. To my surprise, she agreed to everything without negotiation. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop near my office the following week. I arrived early, selected a table with good visibility and multiple exit routes, and ordered a coffee to steady my nerves. When she entered, I almost didn't recognize her. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect makeup. She wore simple slacks and a sweater, minimal jewelry, and looked older than I remembered. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said, sitting down across from me. Her voice lacked the commanding tone I associated with her. "What can I do for you?" I asked, maintaining a neutral expression. She folded her hands on the table, and I noticed they trembled slightly. "First, I want to apologize. What I did was wrong. All of it. The ambush with the lawyers, the lies about your father, the manipulation. I've had a lot of time to think this past year, and I'm not proud of my behavior." I remained silent, neither accepting nor rejecting her apology. After a moment, she continued, "I've been seeing a therapist. She's helping me understand why I've always felt this emptiness that no amount of money or status could fill. It's not an excuse for how I treated you or your father, but I'm trying to change." "I've heard that before," I said, more sharply than I intended. She nodded, accepting the rebuke. "You have every right to be skeptical. I've made promises and broken them many times." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "I brought something I thought you should have." Inside the envelope were old photographs I had never seen before. My father in his 20s, working on his first construction site. My parents standing proudly in front of a tiny office with a hand-painted sign reading Hampton Construction. My father holding me as an infant, looking exhausted, but happy. "Despite everything that happened later, there were good times," she said softly. "Your father was a good man. He deserved better than what I gave him." I studied the photos, feeling a complex mix of emotions. "Why are you giving me these now?" "Because they belong with someone who will treasure them. And because I'm trying to make amends in whatever small ways I can." She hesitated before adding, "I don't expect forgiveness, Junior. I just want you to know that I recognize the harm I've caused." We talked for nearly an hour. She told me about her therapy, her financial counseling, and her attempts to build a more honest life. She had taken a job as an office manager for a small accounting firm, her first regular employment in decades. She was reconnecting with family members she had alienated, including her siblings. I listened more than I spoke, neither fully trusting nor completely dismissing her words. When our time was up, I gathered the photographs and stood to leave. "I can't promise anything," I said, "but I appreciate the apology and the photos." "That's more than I deserve," she replied. "If you ever want to talk again, I'm here, on your terms." I left feeling unsettled, but somehow lighter. Dr. Morrison helped me process the meeting in our next session. "People can change," she acknowledged, "but change is difficult and often incremental. It's wise to maintain boundaries while allowing for the possibility of growth." Following her advice, I established careful parameters for rebuilding contact with my mother. We began with occasional emails, progressed to monthly coffee meetings, always in public places with defined time limits. I made it clear that financial support was not part of our relationship, and to her credit, she never asked. As Hampton Construction continued to thrive, I found myself thinking more about my father's legacy beyond the business. He had built a successful company, yes, but he had also lived with integrity and genuine care for others. To honor that aspect of his life, I established the Robert Hampton Foundation, dedicated to supporting trade education and affordable housing initiatives. The foundation's launch event, held on what would have been my father's 65th birthday, brought together business associates, employees, community leaders, and family members. My mother asked if she could attend, and after consideration, I agreed. She came dressed simply and kept to the background, making no attempt to claim any role or recognition. Several times during the event, I caught her watching me with what appeared to be genuine pride. After most guests had left, she approached briefly. "You've built something meaningful," she said. "Something that will outlast all of us. Robert would be so proud of the man you've become." For the first time in years, maybe ever, I felt her words were completely sincere. That night, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past 18 months. The loss of my father, the conflict with my mother, the growth of the company, and my own personal development through crisis. I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate, not despite the challenges but because of them. Meanwhile, a new chapter of my personal life had begun unexpectedly. During a charity golf tournament, sponsored by Hampton Construction, I had been partnered with Elise Bennett, an environmental engineer whose firm often worked on green building certifications. Our shared interest in sustainable construction led to professional collaboration, which gradually evolved into friendship and eventually romance. Elise was unlike anyone I had dated before. Brilliant and no nonsense. She challenged me intellectually and supported me emotionally. When I finally told her the full story of my family drama, she listened without judgment and asked insightful questions. Most importantly, she valued the same things I had come to prioritize: integrity, purpose, and genuine connection. "You didn't just inherit a company from your father," she observed one evening as we discussed the foundation's work. "You inherited a value system, and you've made it your own." As the anniversary of that fateful family meeting approached, I realized how far I had come. The company was stronger than ever, expanding thoughtfully under my leadership. The foundation was making a real difference in the community. I had developed a small but trusted circle of friends and advisors. And most surprisingly, I was cautiously rebuilding a relationship with my mother on healthier terms. The inheritance that had nearly torn my family apart had become a tool for healing and growth instead. Not just the financial assets, but the less tangible legacy of my father's character and wisdom. That was the true inheritance, and one that could never be taken away. On the one-year anniversary of my father's passing, Hampton Construction closed for the day. Instead of working, all employees were invited to participate in a memorial event at the city park. My father had helped build through donated labor and materials years earlier. We planted trees, dedicated a small pavilion in his name, and shared stories about how Robert Hampton had impacted our lives. My mother attended at my invitation. She kept a respectful distance, interacting politely with those who approached her, but making no attempt to center herself in the proceedings. When it was my turn to speak, I found myself looking at her as I talked about my father's legacy of integrity and service. My father believed that true success wasn't measured by the size of your bank account, but by the positive impact you had on others, I told the gathered crowd. He built more than buildings. He built relationships, opportunities, and community. That's the legacy I'm committed to continuing. Afterward, several longtime employees approached to tell me how much I reminded them of my father, not just in appearance, but in leadership style and values. These comparisons, which might once have felt like pressure, now felt like the highest compliment. The memorial event marked a turning point in my healing process. I had moved from raw grief through anger and confusion to a place of grateful remembrance. My father was gone, but his influence lived on through me, and through the company and foundation that bore our name. My relationship with my mother continued to evolve cautiously. After 6 months of regular but limited contact, I invited her to dinner at my home, the first time she had visited since before the inheritance conflict. Elise joined us, her presence providing both support and perspective. "Your home is lovely," my mother commented, looking around at the modest but comfortable house I had purchased. Nothing like the luxury she had always pursued, but warm and welcoming. "It suits you." "Dad always said a house should be practical first, impressive second," I replied. I think I finally understand what he meant. Over dinner, conversation remained light but genuine. My mother asked thoughtful questions about the business and listened attentively to the answers. She showed particular interest in Elise's work with sustainable building practices. There were awkward moments and old tensions that surfaced briefly, but we navigated them without retreating to past patterns. As the evening ended, my mother pulled a small package from her purse. "I found this while downsizing," she explained, handing it to me. "I thought you should have it." Inside was my father's pocket watch, a family heirloom I had assumed was lost in the divorce settlement. "He left it behind during the move," she said. "I should have returned it years ago." This simple act of returning something that rightfully belonged to our family spoke volumes about her progress. The old Diana would have kept the watch as leverage or sold it for cash. This version recognized its sentimental value and chose to honor that above personal gain. The watch became a symbol to me of the possibility of change, however late in coming. People could grow, could recognize their mistakes, could attempt to make amends. It didn't erase the past harm or guarantee future behavior, but it offered hope. In the following months, I continued to lead Hampton Construction with a blend of my father's wisdom and my own evolving vision. We expanded thoughtfully into new markets, maintained our commitment to quality, and strengthened our reputation for ethical business practices. The company that had once been at risk due to family conflict was now thriving beyond even my father's ambitious plans. The Robert Hampton Foundation grew as well, funding trade school scholarships, affordable housing initiatives, and community improvement projects. At Elise's suggestion, we added environmental sustainability programs, helping low-income homeowners reduce energy costs through efficiency upgrades. My personal growth continued through regular sessions with Dr. Morrison, who helped me process both past trauma and current challenges. "The work you're doing isn't just about healing from specific events," she observed. "It's about breaking intergenerational patterns and creating healthier relationships going forward." This perspective became particularly relevant when, after a year of dating, Elise and I began discussing marriage and eventually children. The prospect of starting my own family brought both joy and anxiety. Would I perpetuate negative patterns from my childhood? Or could I create something healthier, building on the positive examples my father had set, while avoiding the dysfunctional dynamics between my parents? "You're already breaking the cycle by being self-aware," Dr. Morrison assured me, "and by doing the difficult work of processing your experiences rather than burying them." My relationship with my mother stabilized into something I never could have imagined during the height of our conflict. Not close, but cordial. Not trusting, but cautiously optimistic. We maintained clear boundaries and realistic expectations. When she occasionally slipped into old manipulative habits, I recognized the signs and responded firmly but compassionately. 2 years after my father's death, I stood at his grave on a crisp autumn morning. I had come alone to share some news. Hampton Construction had just completed its largest project to date, an environmentally innovative corporate campus that had won national recognition. The Robert Hampton Foundation had funded its 100th scholarship, and Elise had accepted my proposal the previous evening. "I wish you could be here for all this, Dad," I said quietly. "But in a way, you are. Every day, I try to make decisions that would make you proud. Not just in business, but in how I treat people, in the boundaries I set, in the relationships I build." The inheritance that had once threatened to tear apart what remained of my family had instead become a force for growth, healing, and positive change. Not just the financial assets, but the legacy of values, wisdom, and character my father had built over a lifetime. As I placed a small stone on top of his headstone, a tradition he had taught me to honor those who came before us, I reflected on the most important lesson of this difficult journey. True inheritance isn't something that can be quantified in a will or transferred in legal documents. It lives in the lessons we embody, the examples we follow, and the positive impact we create for others. I had protected my financial inheritance through standing firm against manipulation and deception. But the more valuable inheritance I received from my father was the moral compass that guided me through that conflict and beyond. That was something no one could ever take away, and something I hope to pass on someday to children of my own. What about you? Have you ever had to protect yourself from family members who felt entitled to what was rightfully yours? Or have you navigated the complex emotions of receiving an inheritance while grieving a loved one? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to protect your boundaries, even with family. Thank you for listening. And remember that the most valuable inheritance isn't measured in dollars, but in the wisdom and love that shapes who we become.